There's no turning back after a move like that. I didn't ask Dan. I already knew what his answer would be. All I know is that I was shaking as my hand hovered over the computer keyboard. Again, I reread the ad I'd written for an online erotic website. Attractive lady, available for romantic dates with discerning gentlemen, it read. Hitting the send button, I put my face in my hands and burst into tears. My name is Dana. I think anyone can tell you that I'm quite attractive. Sure, I'm not an enthusiastic beauty, but I can always hold my own at parties. I have a slim build, weighing almost 57 kilograms at a height of 165 centimeters. My breasts are small but firm. My stomach is as flat as it was when I was 18. This is the result of me working out at the gym 3 times a week for the last decade. I remember the day my husband Dan bought a Corvette. He was so proud of it, polishing it and wiping it down. He always had a soft cotton cloth in his hands. Whenever he was around it, he was always wiping it down. A few times I rode with him, but he wouldn't let me drive it. Too much power. It's easy to get confused, he told me, masterfully handling the car. That was true, but Dan drove very well, so I didn't worry. I remember a knock on the door. I was just putting fresh baked goods in the oven to bake. Dan was due back soon. He loved my homemade baked goods. I switched him to low-fat sugar, realizing that Dan had developed a little spare tire around the middle. Hoped he wouldn't notice the difference. Still had my mittens on when I opened the door. There were 2 police officers standing there, and my world crumbled around me. It was almost a whole year before I was allowed to bring Dan home. His crushed body was strapped into a wheelchair. He only had use of his left arm. He was quite dexterous with the remote control. His hand was strapped to the armrest so his fingers could hold the buttons free. He couldn't speak or turn his head. I took care of his bodily functions and constantly monitored his body temperature. But inside, this was my Dan, the man I loved. He used his still-working fingers to try to write, painstakingly putting words together on the screen he sat in front of. The idea was to sell some of his work to help our rapidly fading finances. It wasn't going well. Reading some of Dan's work, I got the sense that he was several different people. Sometimes he wrote as a woman, sometimes as a man. Several different men, several different women. Words came out of him in chunks, parts of reality and fantasy mixed strangely. I realized that the world he was living in now was almost all inside him. Then I began the process of putting together this whole crazy patchwork quilt of his writings in a certain order that would make sense. There was a book, a story, if I could sell it. The days went by. Our lives slowly rolled downhill. There was insurance. I remember Dan talking about it the day we signed the policy. No matter what happens, we'll be okay, he told me as he hugged me. I had always had a hard time paying the insurance premiums. Several times I thought it was a waste of the money we so desperately needed. But now it wasn't enough. I realized that nothing is ever enough. Most of the medical expenses were covered. But what about life and living? 90% of all medical expenses, one paragraph read. That sounded great, except for the first $10,000 we paid, a deductible to keep the policy affordable. Plus, his bills were over $1 million, and they were growing. In just 2 short years, I was behind on house payments. Our tiny savings account, which we funded with $100 each month to get us through retirement, had long since run out. I even sold our new minivan and bought an older Dodge. State disability was an allowance. It helped, but nothing more than that. I couldn't work full-time. Dan required constant care to keep his body temperature up and take care of his other needs. It was possible to get away for a few hours, but no more than that. Sure, I tried to hire someone to help, but my secretarial skills limited the potential income. A caregiver cost more than I could earn. Plus, try to get hired somewhere with a disabled husband, hoping for company insurance. Yeah, of course it would work out. Now the bank wanted to foreclose on our house. The nice man who came to talk to me was very sorry, but He then grinned and looked me over from head to toe and said that we can work something out. I realized what he meant. In the end, it came down to this. We were $2,000 behind schedule every month. I went back to taking care of Dan. There was nothing left to do but wait. I had no confidence that anyone would even be interested in a 32-year-old housewife. But it didn't take long to wait. When I opened my email, I saw a dozen responses. Several of them were downright rude. Only one seemed normal to me. He introduced himself as Carl, and I responded by sending a picture of myself taken on the beach in a conservative swimsuit. I received a reply almost instantly, and after a few surprisingly polite emails, we set a date to meet in the lobby of a local hotel. I was scared to death as I dressed in my best black evening dress, with a dropped shoulder on one side and a slit down the side to mid-thigh, meticulously trimmed, powdered, makeup, and hair done. After thinking about lingerie, I realized it wasn't necessary. After spending some money we couldn't afford, I ordered a cab. I didn't want Carl to know what I was driving, partly because the car was cheap, and partly so I couldn't be traced back to my house. My experience so far had been limited to a few fights in the back seat of a car in high school and a few short-term romances in college. Then I met Dan, a beautiful and gentle lover. We fell in love. We were so happy. But Dan wasn't prone to wild love. We were, well, normal. So I had absolutely no idea what to do or what to expect from the man I was about to meet. "Looking good, lady?" said the cab driver as he dropped me off at the hotel. I didn't say anything. Mustering up my courage, I stepped into the lobby. Letting my eyes adjust, I looked around for Carl. Not seeing him, I headed to the bar and ordered a soda. It was a few minutes before I saw him. He was looking around, too. When he spotted me, he walked over. "Dana?" I turned around, giving him my best forced smile. He was about 50 years old, tall and well-dressed. There were gray hairs peeking through on his temples, but the smile on his face put me at ease a little. "You're much prettier than you look in the picture." "Thank you," I replied, trying to hide my nervousness. "Why don't we retire to my room?" That was appropriate, so I finished my soda and stood up. His room was located very high up. I looked around when he opened the door. It wasn't cheap. Somehow that helped. "Music?" "Sure." I found a couch and settled on it as the soft sounds of a female singer filled the air. He joined me on the couch and handed me an envelope. I almost made the mistake of asking what it was for, but then I realized it would contain the $500 I'd asked for. I didn't open it to count it. Then I realized he was looking at me expectantly. I don't know what I expected to happen next. Small talk? Perhaps seduction? "What would you like?" I asked. He looked at me strangely. "Would you mind undressing for me?" I hesitated. He looked at me strangely again. "Have you ever done this before?" "No." I burst into tears. I couldn't help it. He put his arms around me, waiting for me to stop. He looked awkward. "Look, can't we just—" "No, I have to!" I stood up quickly, pulled the shoulder strap down. I unzipped and pulled down my dress. I was naked underneath. Carl smiled, looking down at me intently. I fought the urge to cross my arms over my chest, to cover my groin with my palms. Just stood there and waited, letting him watch. He took his time, seeming to like what he saw. "I assume you'll be making love?" "Yes." I fought to keep my mind on Dan, on the fact that this was for him, for us, not for me. Then all I could do was feel the sensations. My body, untouched for over a year, was on fire. Carl exhaled and leaned back on the back of the couch after our lovemaking. I jumped up and went to the bathroom, rinsing myself off as best I could. God, that's the kind of professional I am, I thought. Back naked in the living room, I reached for my dress. Carl was sitting there naked too, studying me while I changed. He had a satisfied expression on his face. "That was unusual," he said. "Thank you," I murmured. "You'll get the hang of it. I guess it shows that I don't—" My voice broke. "Yeah, that was fun. Do you have a card?" I didn't have one. I found a piece of paper and wrote down my number. "I have a few friends who would be interested in you," he told me. I just nodded. "Not many of you girls are real," he smirked. "Good night," I told him, actually blushing as I headed for the door. On the way in the elevator, I counted the money in the envelope. Yes, $500. I slipped it into my purse. On the street, I hailed a cab. The driver looked me over from head to toe as I got in. After giving the address, we pulled onto the road. Halfway there, I caught his gaze in the mirror. "You working? Oh my God, is it showing?" "Yeah, there's no point in denying it now." "How much?" I smiled at him. $500. $500, he exclaimed. "Wow, too rich for me, lady. How about we trade for rides?" I didn't answer. As we drove through the dark streets to the house, I leaned my head against the window. A tear ran down my cheek. Yes, a working girl. Already even the driver could see that. "My name is Dana. I'm a call girl. Never in my former life would I have even considered letting men make love to me for a fee, but sometimes life takes a twist. I let men, and some women, use all sorts of different parts of me for their own purpose. Some try to be kind and loving, wanting me to assure them of that. I quickly turn into a loving woman who idolizes them. I make them feel powerful, desirable. Some women look down on me. I hold my head high. Is their mink coat, diamond ring, fancy dinner any different than my envelope of money? I have a need to see it that way. It helps me reason. Some men hire me to grab me and call me names, clinging to me not in passion but in fear, even hate. I become submissive. I do what they tell me to do. I have been called a cheater, a fool. These words are meant to belittle me, to allow someone to feel superior to me in their own world. I just let them use me, to be in charge. But are they really better? They're all doing the same thing I'm doing. The difference is that they have to pay me to do it at all. Truth be told, I think I'm probably a better person than the men and women who use me. Most would use me if I let them, but most can't unless they pay. Otherwise, they wouldn't be good enough. I have to believe that to keep going. My husband, Dan, was terribly injured in a car accident. Confined to a wheelchair, he moves only his left arm and fingers. He doesn't speak, only touches the keys of the always-on computer in his room. It took help to manage even the most basic bodily functions. Dan writes. He writes constantly, one laborious keystroke at a time. Many of you have read his work without knowing the true source. His whole world is inside him, and it comes out on the screen. Some of the stories have been sold for pennies. Every penny helps, Dan tries. Inside these crushed remains of a once beautiful, strong man is still the man I love, the man I swore to forever. Our life together wasn't magical. It was comfortable and good. Dan loved me tenderly. No perversions, no shooting stars, just kindness and a willingness to share. I was a totally faithful, conservative housewife, completely content. Dan worked, I cooked and cleaned our little piece of the world to a shine. Then a terrible car accident. I could handle taking care of Dan. I could handle most of the changes in my life. But the expenses, the expense of treatment, and then just living. Even with insurance, with minimal government assistance, we were rolling downhill, about $2,000 every month. That sweet-sounding phrase covers 90% of all expenses above. No one ever expects $2 million in medical expenses and the current $200,000 each year. Soon, almost everything was lost, and there was no sign that finances would ever improve. Dan and I both forgot about disability insurance and our home insurance. Had he died? Then the house would have been paid for. But Dan didn't die. That became our problem. There was no one, no agency that could help. Nothing at all. Just me. One day, a man from the bank came by with the paperwork. We were at the end of our tether. If we lost the house, Dan would die. I knew it. I didn't even have money to rent an apartment. The bank just wanted its money. I could understand that. It was this man who gave me an idea. He looked me over from head to toe and suggested it. We could work something out. I knew exactly what he meant. And I almost agreed, and probably would have if it hadn't been for Dan sitting there, helpless. The man from the bank spoke to me as if my husband were a table, a piece of furniture in the room. Dan could hear perfectly well. At first, I thought long and hard before I advertised. I wasn't even sure I could go for it. Love for a fee? Would anyone really even be interested in someone like me? I knew about men. I knew about their desires from fiddling in the back seat of the car, but I was completely naive about love. It helped that I had to use an online ad service. At least I could be anonymous. I set the price very high. I believe it was self-defense. I thought no one would ever pay that much. But I found out very quickly that yes, they would. A man named Carl was my first. I was lucky. He wasn't harsh or mean. He just had a need and he wanted me to fulfill it. He seemed delighted at my first amateurish attempts to pleasure him. Until that very moment, I just wasn't sure I could go through with it. But I did it. I allowed it. I did it to save Dan. There's no turning back after taking that step. Like I said, I was lucky. Carl actually turned out to be kind, even gentle. As much as I fought my own pleasure, my body betrayed me and took over. I felt like I had cheated, betrayed my husband, the man I loved. $500 for a quick hour of intimacy, if that's the right term, seemed high to me. I was surprised it was so willingly paid for. Carl took me under his wing, so to speak. He became a protector of sorts. Some would call him a daddy, but he wasn't. He never took anything from me that I wouldn't allow. He always paid. He also had business associates, and he mentioned me to some of them. Over time, I catered to several of his business partners. Soon, they became a solid blur of faces. Sometimes 3 or 4 at the same time. I liked several at once. I fell back into my first-time shyness, and they often tipped me very well to seduce me. Almost always, they would then hire me for private sessions. One even hired me to let him make love to me while his wife sat and watched, and then they wanted me to watch him do the same with his wife. I knew I would be well paid. Soon I became numb to all the scenarios, all the illicit desires I was hired to fulfill. I became very good at reading what the client wanted. A few simple changes in demeanor and body language. And their reaction told me what to do. One man, much older than me, opened the door of his hotel room, looked me over from head to toe. The expression on his face told me he was unhappy with my overly sexy way of dressing. I took a chance. "Dad, I'm sorry. Do you want me to change my clothes?" He turned to me again, his eyes glittering brightly, and I realized. "Yeah, you're a bad girl if you walk around like that. Go change." I always tried to come prepared. Different options were in my bag. I ended up wearing simple white cotton panties and a flared skirt, and buttoned up a white blouse in the front. The old man made me lie on his lap as he gently stroked me. Oddly enough, it was fun. I'd seen it several times. Each time for $500 each time. Plus, Carl was paying me to take care of his clients as well. Carl also invited me over to his place every couple weeks. I became comfortable with him. Somehow, despite being paid, Carl became my outlet for satisfying my own body. Otherwise, my life had been reduced to satisfying Dan's needs and scheduling the next appointment. Financial improvements in Dan's life and my life happened quickly. I obtained a loan from the bank and used some of the extra money to purchase equipment that automatically monitored and regulated Dan's body temperature. I installed an alarm system in case something happened while I was away from home. One touch, and an in-home nurse could respond in minutes. These devices changed my life. Now I could be gone for hours instead of 2 or 3. I even bought a better car, a used one. But at least it wasn't beat up and noisy. My life became a routine. Get up, feed Dan, take care of his needs, then shower and get myself cleaned up for the ones I had on my schedule. It seemed like almost every day someone was on my schedule. Dan didn't seem to notice it, at least he never mentioned it to me. We talked often, though. He would type the words, and I would talk to him. I thought he didn't know what I was doing. Looking back, I realized that of course he should have. It took me 3 long years to pay off my medical bills, and in that same period I paid off our house. All that was left was the ongoing medical and living expenses. I remember the day my insurance ran out. Another sweet clause in the fine print that went as an add-on and read, 5-year maximum. I am now resigned to my fate. Long gone were the tears over what I did for a living, or should I say numb. Only with Carl did I allow myself to relax. With the others I yelled and wiggled. I was good at pretending. I was good at figuring out what was pulling my client's chain. I could turn from an outspoken wench to a conservative young lady requiring a convoluted seduction in a matter of seconds. Like I said, I was lucky. I was able to get right into the business, and thanks to connections through Carl, I didn't have to deal with appearances and concerns about some of the dangers associated with the trade. Of course, there were a couple of incidents. One person put $200 in $20 bills in an envelope, but a phone call to Carl fixed it. Yes, it's true, I never counted the money. It was always there except for one time. The other time I arrived at the room and was inside before I realized there were 2 men, not one. This customer was a referral from one of the other customers. I quickly realized that I could be in trouble, so when they demanded that I undress, I did so. The envelope was gone, but I got out of there almost unscathed. My phone call to Carl yielded nothing. They were gone when the men he sent arrived. I don't know what happened to the man who sent them. I never saw him again. After that, I became much more careful. One day, when I got home from a client meeting, there was a white van parked outside my house. It was Connie, our home care nurse. We had an alarm system installed that Dan could push if he needed help. I rushed inside, concerned. Something was wrong. Connie was examining Dan's right leg. She looked at me, giving me a disapproving look from head to toe. I realized that she saw my too short skirt, too much cleavage, and too much makeup on my face and figured it out. I must have blushed. What's wrong? His toe and foot are infected. But how? He can't feel it. It looks like he can. He wrote on the screen that he's in pain. Dan was taken to the hospital, treated and tested. Somehow, sensation was returning to his feet. One of his toenails, which I had carelessly trimmed, had grown in and become infected. Just lucky he regained sensitivity and noticed it. My life and what I was doing was for him, but became my life and what I was doing for myself. I missed all the signs. Dan finally pressed the button to get outside help to handle what was supposed to be my job. I didn't notice it, immersed in my world of love and money. That's when I realized he knew too. I sat and cried for hours. After Dan came home, I didn't go anywhere for weeks. I spent all my time caring for and working with him. Then something else happened. One day I was washing him, changing his bottle. When I looked up, I saw tears in his eyes. A few days later, I talked to Carl, explaining that I was going to try to get a job. Carl offered me to work for him. My secretarial skills were a perfect fit for his business. Besides, I don't want to lose you, he added. I knew what that meant, and realized that my job would probably also involve taking care of Carl, meeting his needs. Probably my own too, of course. The difference was obvious to me. I would make love to one man I liked for money, or I could do it with a whole series of men I didn't care for money. At least that's how it seemed to me at the time. I took the job. I was good at it, and in more than 2 months, Carl had never once asked or suggested lovemaking. On some days, young women would come in and stop by his office. I just did my job, not really missing love. Besides, Carl paid me very well. I became almost content. My own desires took a back seat as my mind was occupied with all the new aspects of working full-time. One day I was typing up a series of sales reports for one of Carl's product lines when he called me. I grabbed my notepad, preparing to jot down a letter. "You won't be needing this," he said as I walked into his office. What? And then I realized, somewhere in my fantasy world, I must be Dana, the conservative housewife again. I put the notebook aside and took a deep breath. Then I let a smile cover my face, preparing myself for what I thought was coming next. "Please sit down. I need to ask you something." Embarrassed, I sat down. "Tonight I have 3 clients coming to town. They will be here for a few days." I tried my best not to react. "They're Japanese, and they asked for personal entertainment?" The last one was a question. I knew what he wanted. "They asked for you." "Of course they did." I managed to hide a sigh. Carl nodded. "Thank you. I'll make it worth your while." Smiling, I walked back to my desk. The Japanese gentleman will probably tip well, I thought. I sat and thought about it. Nothing special. Nothing I hadn't already done. But I knew I didn't want to. I wanted to be home with my man, living like the nice conservative housewife I used to be. But I had already calculated that we were falling behind on bills again. It's time to go to work. Yeah, you can't know what this life is like until you've lived it like I have. I put my head down on my hands, but there were no tears. They had long since left me. I'm Dana, a working girl. I took the step to this on my own, knowing there was no turning back. Not really. You can hide, you can pretend, you can move, you can take your husband and try again in another city. The next man I meet might remember me. There have been thousands of them, and I have nowhere to go. The end result will be the same. No matter what, I'll always be who I am. I serve men for money. If you hire me, you're no better than I am. In fact, you're just like me. I only make you feel like it's different. So if you do that, you're just John. And me? I'm just a working girl. The end.